Hello, everybody. I'm Jess Zimmerman, an editor at Quirk Books, and I'm delighted to welcome everyone to what I'm sure will be a fascinating conversation about alcohol and sobriety, multi-level marketing schemes, and what they have in common. Our panelists tonight are Tawny Lara and Lynn Paulson. Tawny is a journalist with 8+ years of reporting on the sober curious space, focusing on the role liquid courage plays in interpersonal relationships. She's the author of DRY Humping, a guide to dating, relating, and hooking up without the booze, co-host of the Recovery Rocks podcast, and co-founder of the vinegar-based botanical beverage Parentheses. You can subscribe to her newsletters called Beyond Liquid Courage, and I'll drop a link to that in the chat. Lynn Paulson is the author of Highlight Reel, Finding Honesty and Recovery Beyond the Filtered Life, and Hey Hun, Sales, Sisterhood, Supremacy, and the Other Lies Behind Multilevel Marketing. She's the founder of Sober Moms Squad, a digital community for moms in recovery, and has given 2 powerful TEDx talks, both challenging the status quo of parenting, alcohol use, and feminism as we know it. Please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. You can use that space to talk about things that interest you during the conversation. And I'm going to drop links to both authors' books in there as well, and to Tawny's newsletter. You can also, you'll see underneath our faces, there's a big green button to buy DRY Humping. So two different ways to find that. If you have questions, to make it easier to find them, please use the question box that's over in the left menu bar. There's a little box with a question mark on it to put things for the Q&A. You can also upvote other people's questions if someone asks something that you are also interested in. And then I'll be back towards the end of the hour for our Q&A portion. So take it away, Tawny and Emily.
Thanks, Jess.
Hi, Tawny.
Hello, my love.
I'm so glad to be doing this with you today.
Yes, me too. Thank you for doing this with me. I guess maybe we could share a little bit of our backstory of like maybe how we met and what brings us to this interesting Venn diagram of liquid courage and MLMs and cults.
Yeah. So, I mean, social media, right, is how we met through the sober community. So I'm a little over 7 years sober, and Tawny, you're like 9 or 10, right? Or
a little over 8. Yeah.
A little over 8. Okay. I thought you had more time on me, but
almost.
Yeah. So connecting just through our work in the recovery space. And it was funny because once I started sharing about how I was writing the second book, Tawny, you were like, ooh, I've got to tell you something. And so we started connecting. And one of the things we do is like send back and forth, like screenshots of old Facebook posts that come up and
of our cringe MLM days. So we were both in an MLM back in like long before we met, 2 different MLMs, but as we will talk about tonight, they're all the same.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, these cringe Facebook memories pop up, and then we like to text each other. Maybe it just, I don't know, it reminds me of like how much I've grown as a person.
Just like the same photos that pop up from like my drinking days or whatever. And I think just going through the process with you, because our books came out the same year. And anyway, we've had a lot to connect over, and there's been a lot of overlap, which is interesting considering they seem like such different topics. They really aren't.
And, you know, I've written about our intersection of liquid courage and MLMs and cults in my newsletter, Beyond Liquid Courage. And some of the recurring comments I get are like, wow, I never thought about how the two actually intersect. So I think maybe we could explain how they intersect. But maybe I'll explain what liquid courage is, and then maybe you can explain what MLMs are, and then we can talk about Venn diagram.
For sure.
So in my book, DRY Humping, A Guide to Dating, Relating, and Hooking Up Without the Booze, I took a journalistic perspective on the role that alcohol, but mainly liquid courage, plays in our interpersonal relationships, predominantly in, you know, romantic relationships, sexual relationships, relying on, you know, this elixir to make us feel more confident on dates. And Something that I learned in my research was that this conversation was not just relevant to people in recovery like you and I, people who even still drink alcohol or maybe identify as sober curious or mindful drinkers relate to this concept of liquid courage, meaning relying on alcohol to help you feel more confident, help you maybe feel more confident on a date, in the bedroom, but even zooming out from sex and dating, just relying on liquid courage to, go to happy hour with your friends, to catch up with your friends, relying on alcohol to get through awkward family dinners. And so I really took this cultural zeitgeist look of the role that liquid courage plays with normal people like you and me, but also how it's portrayed on screen, on film, on television, and how those tropes actually impact us as people, how the normalization of liquid courage on screen further, keeps the stigma going that we need alcohol to feel more confident. And it also it's an example I give in my book of like, I've watched Sex and the City hundreds of times. Like I know each episode by heart. And there's a particular episode where Carrie is hooking up with Berger and she needs alcohol to tell him that the sex just isn't good. And that just left me feeling like, God, if Carrie Bradshaw needs liquid courage, like what do us normal people do
Mm.
when we need to have an awkward conversation? So that was really like, the impetus for writing this book and examining the role that liquid courage plays in our love lives.
Yeah. Just when you said Sex in the City, I think that's a good, like, just reminder of what we see versus what's really there. Because as may or may not know, the cast of Sex in the City are all sober people. And so it's funny that what they represent and what they really are is different. If they're playing a character, sure. But I think that liquid courage, that's one of the reasons I drank for sure. And it's the fake authenticity, really, that, am I drinking because it helps me do the things I really want to do? Or am I drinking because it wears down the intuition, keeping me from doing things that I don't want to do? And I think that line gets really blurred. And that was something that I realized when I stopped drinking that, led me to really evaluate this, not only relationships I was in, things I was doing, but, this MLM I was in. That was one of the biggest red flags, because I was like, ooh, a lot of the like amends I'm making are surrounding this thing. And gosh, how it's really taken me out of being authentic, that I had to drink to do certain things, thinking that was the secret sauce, when in reality, that was what was, really drowning my intuition of the things that I wanted to do.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's super relatable. And it's, the intuition that also reminds me of inhibitions. That was something that I got, that came up a lot in my research, whether it was me digging through my own past, but also just I interviewed dozens and dozens of people for this book. And the concept of I want to lower my inhibitions, that just came up all the time. And so I talked to several therapists and other mental health professionals about, why we actually need inhibitions, right? We need inhibitions to know when we feel safe. We need to feel safe in order to have a healthy dating life, have a healthy sex life, have healthy interpersonal relationships. And to me, inhibitions also, it's very parallel with setting boundaries and figuring out what we're comfortable doing on a date in a bedroom versus relying on this magical elixir to make all those boundaries and inhibitions go away, to be borderline performative in our relationships.
Yeah. And that translates to work relationships, and think about like happy hours and how, when you really get to the heart of it, is like, should we be drinking at work? I don't know if that's the best choice, but getting people to lower their inhibitions to do things that maybe they're not totally comfortable doing. And I found this to be very true when I was in the MLM. I'm sure, as you know as well, is I would say things, do things that I wouldn't normally do. And I think when you're surrounded by people who are doing the same thing, whether it's you're surrounded by a culture of people who are drinking at every turn, or you're surrounded by people who are in a closed environment, it's going to be more normalized, which is why I think it's so hard to get out of those systems.
Very much so. And it's, you and I have both left two cults. One, the cult of liquid courage, the cult of relying on alcohol. And we've left the cult of MLMs. And there's a lot of, in that Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap. I was wondering if you could touch on that a little bit.
Yeah. So cult always draws a lot of like, ooh, like that's a big word. And I think realizing that, the idea of a cult is we're all involved in like kind of culty things all of the time. Even if it's like your workout program or something that has like sort of loaded language that nobody else understands. But that's all fine and good and it's not necessarily harmful. But this idea of really like coercive control and being in a group, a high control group where everybody thinks the same way, acts the same way, does the same thing. And when it's interlaced with friendship. So, that was really, the MLM world for me was a friend introduced me to this thing. I thought this thing could lead to money and more friendships and, prosperity and time freedom and all these things. And it looked really good on social media. And I really fell into that trap. Again, was drinking, it wasn't totally authentic, but found it hard to leave because once you're so intertwined, that's where your friendship groups are. And sometimes the pain of leaving is worse than the pain of staying. And it's like, well, I'm doing this thing and I'm sending these cold messages and I don't really like it. And I think it's not equitable and it's probably not ethical. But if I leave, ... So you've got this, sunk cost fallacy. You've got all this time you've spent. So I think, that's the cultish aspect of a multi-level marketing company. And then the alcohol, really, when you think about it, and on its face, it's the same thing. Those thoughts that come in like, gosh, if I stop drinking, am I going to be the fun person anymore? Am I going to get invited places? Am I going to, there's just a lot of overlap, I found.
Very much so. And keeping that same wave going, like when I quit drinking, I learned who my true friends are and who just kept me around because they wanted a drinking buddy.
Mhm.
And I did the same thing to other people, don't get me wrong. And the same thing with MLM. When I quit, I was a fitness instructor who sold shakes and supplements and pills and all of the things. And in the fitness world, MLMs are very prevalent in the fitness world. And when I left the MLM, I also had a similar experience of learning who my real friends are and who were my networking buddies. And that was really painful, for both experiences, especially because, and I think that, again, this is where the intersection lies. There's vulnerability. People are vulnerable when they join an MLM. They're missing something. Moms join MLMs more than any other population, as you discussed in your book. And when you're relying on alcohol, you're lonely, you're vulnerable, you're looking for some sort of connection. And so I think it's really interesting that they both share that. And then especially there's a lot of overlap at these events. All the MLM events I went to, there was always wine. So yeah, I'm wondering, can you speak to the mom angle, or maybe like women in particular, how we are targeted for these MLMs?
Yeah. I mean, you'd have to look no further than like, go to Target or wherever they have, rose all day shirts. Like we're targeted through marketing. We're targeted through, they have pink, bottles of wine and cute decorated, little cans that say mom wine. Like there's so much marketing towards women. And yeah, moms are vulnerable because again, you are more isolated. You're kind of having this, life change. If you're a new mom, maybe you've left the workforce, maybe you want to get back into the workforce. No matter what you're doing something wrong, according to someone. And, it's this sense of community that, mom wine culture gives and MLMs give. Join this and you will be friends and you will have fun and all of these things. And it's really hard because then it sort of builds on itself. I know for me, the same reason I drank was the same reason I sought out joining an MLM, because I was looking for an escape. I was looking for something else outside of myself, something I felt like was missing. I wanted community. I wanted something else. And when you find that, and whether it works or not, then it builds on itself, because the more I drank, the more I, felt shame, and the more I needed to drink. And the more I sold, the more, I went to events where I drank. And the more I drank, the more, so it was like just this vicious cycle that kind of built on itself.
Well,
Um,
in your book, you talk about how you got sober while you were still in your MLM, and they wanted you to exploit your sobriety to recruit more people and sell more product.
Yeah, and it really takes the form. The exploitative part of it is that it's always a sob story and then a inspirational tale of redemption or whatever. And no matter what that is, it's used to sell stuff, to recruit people. And when you get to this place of recovery where, gosh, you're reckoning with so much, and you're trying to repair relationships and figure out a new routine and just kind of figure out your entire life, really. And you're given an opportunity like, hey, why don't you come and share your recovery story? And you're
Mhm.
taught, oh, I'm supposed to be of service. Sharing my story is good. Again, it's that intertwined aspect of it that I was like, well, this can't be that bad, right? Like, I'm sharing my story. That's a good thing. It seemed, in comparison, I was doing like a good service by doing this, but all I was doing was creating another before and after story that had nothing to do with this structure, right? It just was being used to get more people in. And look, if you join this, look at the personal development changes you can have. Look how wonderful your life can be. Look how inspirational this person is. And I didn't even see it at the time. It really took some time away to be like, oh, okay, that wasn't okay.
The personal development angle, it's reminding me of some other cults that I've been involved in with, I got involved in a couple self-help cults. The exit cost was very high. It was very difficult to leave. I worked for an athleisure brand that we all know of. That was also very culty. But I think I grew up in Waco, Texas. So, cults of cults, right? So that is where, the David Koresh, the Branch Davidians, that's where all that happened. And my mom and I actually walked through the compound after all of it, after the FBI raid and everything. My mom and I walked through that compound, and I saw everything. And I was just so fascinated. Yes, I was way too young, but that definitely planted a seed of like, wow, this is like, these people gave up their whole lives to live on this secluded environment.
Mhm.
And honestly, ever since then, I've been very obsessed with the psychology of cults and how a lot of people don't understand why somebody would join a cult.
Mhm.
And I think, we can go into, we did kind of go into that. It is this vulnerability. We're looking for connection, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, wondering, do you have anything to add to?
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, is people don't join cults. They join a good thing. Like nobody, I think what makes you most vulnerable to coercive control is thinking that it's not possible for you. And we are all capable of, falling victim to coercive control. It's hard to see until you are out of it. It's hard to see when you're in it. But if you have enough hope in something, if you have enough belief in something, logic will lose. And that is why when you talk to people who are in coercive environments, whether it's a, high control religious group, whether it's an MLM, whatever it is, they have such belief. And I had such belief. I believed it to be true that this was the best thing I could be doing for anybody. People don't go out to seek harm and say, I want to, recruit other people into this, harmful cult. They think they're offering a gift. I thought I was offering a gift. And so
Not
it's
just a gift,
hard.
it's an exclusive opportunity that I can't tell you about until we meet in person, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And so when you come at it that way, where, oh gosh, this isn't something that, with empathy, and looking back at myself with empathy, that this is something I really believed in. And once I realized I wasn't selling, what I was selling was not really there. I was selling a dream that didn't exist. That's when I think the
Mm.
reckoning kind of came in. But nobody signs up for something thinking they're joining a bad thing. They think they're joining a good thing. And so for someone to say, like, I don't know how you would join that. Well, of course, it's like, hey, here, this is this wonderful path to personal development. And then it turns out to be, the Nixium cults or whatever. And then, this is this path to whatever. It starts somewhere. It starts small, and it's like boiling the frog. By the time you realize you're, boiled, it's too late, right? Yeah.
Very much. And, something that I've learned in my recovery is, that we can't save people who are still in these cults, right?
Mhm.
Whether it's the cult of liquid courage, alcoholism, MLMs, another, personal development cult, whatever it is, we can't save these people. And in my recovery, I've had to cut ties with some people who were either still active in their addiction because they didn't want to get help. And I had to really, again, boundary. I had to set a boundary of, like, I love you so much, and until you're ready to get help, I can't be part of your life.
Mhm.
And I've had to do the same thing with a dear friend who got really caught up in QAnon.
Mhm.
And it was, very similar. It was pretty much the same conversation, um, which was mind blowing for me to discover that, these people have found something that they think is the answer,
Yeah.
whether it's drugs and alcohol, whether it's QAnon or an MLM or something else, or, Nexium. They think they found the answer, and they think they're doing good, and they want to share that good with you. So it's really, really difficult to navigate those interpersonal relationships when the other person thinks they have the answer and they're actually sick,
Yeah.
for lack of a
Yeah.
better word.
Well, and I'm sure you've experienced this. I mean, I'm a seeker, you're a seeker. Like, we're always seeking out, to better ourselves, and the newest, latest, greatest. Like, I've always been that way. And so when you are that person, just allowing yourself that 1% that maybe you're not 100% right. Just
Yeah.
like, okay, I'm into this 99%. That's how I operate now. Because I know that anything I've devoted myself 100% to, ends up, I don't know, there's just always something there. And there's a reason why I think we make room for everything. And in recovery, I'm very open to so many different paths in recovery, because I have seen where being devoted to one entire dogmatic path can really backfire for some people. For some, it doesn't. But I know for me, as a seeker, I can't put 100% of my belief in anything. As long as I'm leaving myself open to, you know what, I'm open to constructive criticism. I'm open to critical thinking. That is something that is shut down, again, when you're drinking. When you're drinking, first of all, you can't have critical thinking skills, right? That's like the goal of alcohol in the first place. And when you watch halftime shows with alcohol ads, and it's meant to make you think there's no problem here, there's nothing wrong here, there's no issue, unless you happen to be an alcoholic, then there is. But up until that point, you're fine. Like, there's no wiggle room. And so just allowing that, like, there's nothing is 100% good and 100% bad necessarily. It's just, be open to that critical thinking, that maybe it's not the end all be all. And so I think what you're talking about friendship, that really hits home, because it can be, your choices can be a mirror for other people. And in recovery, that's huge. When I stopped drinking, there were people who were like, ooh,
Yeah.
it almost made them, well, do you think I have a problem? Do I need to stop? Can we be friends? And same thing when I left the MLM. And some of that makes you realize, gosh, we probably weren't actually friends in the first place. It was just proximity. It
Yep.
was just convenience. It was someone making money off of me. And that's a hard pill to swallow. um, but, but that's, that again, that's taking that step back of that nothing can be everything when you're someone who is a seeker, or else, there's no room for anything else.
Well, and I think you and I share that belief and passion for critical thinking because we also have a shared passion for science, and
Mhm.
and we're okay with being wrong. We're okay with being proved wrong. We're okay with discourse. And a lot of people are not, which is why they get stuck in this groupthink mentality of you have to drink to have fun. You have to sell these shakes in order to find this new life. Yeah, what do you think on that?
Yeah, I think the automatic, like, oof, like when in my last year and worst year of my drinking, I noticed, looking back, that I posted a lot more memes and jokes about drinking, right? I was so willing to defend, very defensive about my drinking, and I think that is a survival mechanism. It really is, because what does it say about me if I'm doing something that's bad, or people think are bad? And the same thing when I was in the MLM and there were any negative YouTube videos sent my way, or anybody like me who was calling out, who was maybe criticizing the business model. There wasn't any, okay, let me listen to this and then respond to your actual comments. It was, I just had an automatic defensive reaction. And that was, obviously programmed, pre-scripted. This was just the way it went. And not having my own responses, not having my own line of thinking. And so I think that's just a personal development thing as well that's come with recovery, is giving the space to pause and thinking, okay, am I right about this? Am
Yeah.
I 100% right about this? Or am I just feeling defensive and makes me feel some sort of way, you saying this about me and what I'm doing, that I'm just responding and not actually listening to what you're saying.
And it comes across as defensive
Mhm.
because you're not letting new information in.
Yeah.
And with MLMs and a lot of other cults, they arm you with these canned responses of, haters might ask you this, here's what to reply.
Yeah.
And it's looking back, I'm just like, wow, they have it all covered. Like, even in my one of my self-help cults that I was in, the very first day, someone was like, is this a cult? I'm pretty sure it was a planted question so they could
Oh, sure.
so they could be like, oh no, I'm so glad you asked. This is the reason this is not a cult is because of blah 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 blah. And I was just like, at the time I thought, oh, see, they addressed it up front. There's no way this could be a cult. They wouldn't have brought it up. No,
Mhm.
they do this on purpose to make it seem more relatable, make it seem like they're meeting you where they are, but that's not actually what's happening. They're arming you with these canned responses.
Yeah, it's the preempting of, this is gonna feel weird. So when you get this answer, don't be surprised. They're preempting you with the constructive feedback that people are going to give you. When friends and family are like, "Ooh, are you sure you want to do that?" They're giving you automatic responses to that. Um, yeah, it's just kind of the wearing down again of that intuition and what you would say naturally. And it's all, again, under the guise of like this personal development, like I'm, I'm leveling up, I'm, whatever. And it's really not. You're just kind of parroting back what you've been told. Yeah.
Um, I always like when you share the what is it, the fail rate of MLMs? Because
Oh, yeah, yeah,
don't know it. So can you explain, can you go into that a bit?
yeah. So, and if you don't know what a multi-level marketing company is, this might probably should have been like the first thing I said. It's the multi-level aspect of it. So I'm not talking about if you sell a product, if you like, that's great. Sales are great. But it's companies and there's many, many, many of them that you join, and you have a sponsor or an upline who then makes money off the products you sell, and then you recruit other people. So it's a pyramid scheme with product, essentially, is what it is. And they have a 99.7% failure rate, which means 99.7% of people who join, who give money, will never see a profit. Will have a loss right off the bat. And because it's a pay to play system, people give their money, most never see it. And the companies themselves, which are huge corporations, are very successful because so many people pay in and don't get paid out. And there are just a few people at the top of the pyramid who get paid. And also just the guise of like women's empowerment, which is another parallel to alcohol, because again, it's sold as like, drink like the boys, be a strong woman and drink your whiskey or whatever. It's sold as like, this is you can be your own CEO, build your fempire. They're all corporations run by white men. And so again, it's that cognitive dissonance of like, oh, is this empowering? It's not really empowering. Yeah.
Well, and it's every Black Friday I see support small business, buy my waist trainer, buy these pills. And it's like, no, you're not actually a small business.
Yeah.
And I think it's worth noting that you and I were quote unquote successful in our MLMs. You got the car, like the car that's dangled in front of all of us. You got the car. And, I was a fitness instructor who, people would buy whatever I was selling. So, and then people would sign up under me because they wanted what I had. And now looking back on it, that was a huge amends that I had to make and make peace with, is that I signed people up thinking that they could sell like me.
Mm-hmm.
They were not social media trained. They were not fitness instructors. I had all of these things that I didn't realize you had to have in order to succeed, whatever the hell that means, in an MLM.
Yeah. And it's true. Because people have asked, well, how come you were successful? And, there are a few things like, part of it's just dumb luck. Part of it is I got in early. I have a spouse who has an income. Like I wasn't like the only one with a job. And I was connected. I had a huge network of people who also had money to spend. Yeah. And so, you need money to be successful in these things already. And there's a reason why you look at the top of these structures and these leadership trips, and you see people on a yacht or, on a cruise, they won their trip from their MLM, and they're basically all white women. And that's not an accident. And some of the pushback I got from the book was the fact that I talked about white supremacy as a white person. And I think it's important to talk about the systems that harm people that you're involved in. Like as a white person, that was very important for me to talk about, that I got to the top and realized like it's not like a Black woman saw herself there, because it was all a bunch of white women, and how is that equitable? And it's not. And really dissecting that and being like, oh, I was selling that, crap, like to really look at your behavior.
Very much in the same vein, people of color and people in the queer community suffer from substance use disorder at significantly higher rates than cisgender people, than white people. So it's intersectionality is a big part of both of our work, which is, one of the many, many reasons that we fell in love on the internet.
That's right.
So how did you learn how to make real friends in sobriety and post MLM? And then I can answer that too.
Yeah. So looking at my circle of friends after quitting alcohol, it was real easy to see real quick the people who I was just hanging out with to drink. And this can happen a lot in progressive, like in people whose drinking gets to that rock bottom place, which mine did. You seek out relationships where people are drinking as much, if not more than you. because in comparison, you don't feel so bad about yourself. And that's a hard thing to admit, but I absolutely did that. And realizing that, gosh, at the end of the day, some of those friendships were just about the alcohol, and there wasn't anything else there. And those really did go by the wayside. The people who really were like, oh yeah, you're just, Emily, whether you drink or don't drink, those people are still around. And I've gained so many more connections. It's easier, I think, to make friends who want an authentic friendship when you can't have that liquid courage, right? Which again is in quotes because it really isn't liquid courage, but
Yeah.
um, that the center of the relationship is the relationship and not the substance. And the same goes for the same was very true when then I left the MLM. The friendships that stayed were the ones that were there before. Wouldn't matter what I'm involved in. I still have lots of friends who are in MLMs. Like, that's not a condition of friendship for me, just like I have lots of friends who drink. That's not the condition of friendship. But when that is the reason for the friendship, that's when the relationships kind of fell by the wayside. How about you?
That's a really good distinction. Yeah, it's, when I quit bartending and I left Texas and I moved to New York City, that was the first time I really examined my relationship with alcohol, because that was the first time I drank around non-bartenders, meaning normal people, normal people who work regular jobs, who had just one or two drinks and then went home. I never did that I never did that in Waco. So that was significant for me. And I got a lot of flack from my former drinking buddies, because I started a blog where I was documenting my early sobriety in New York City, and people would talk a lot of shit on Facebook about me, saying I'm not really sober, or Tawny didn't really have a drinking problem. So that was a really difficult thing to reckon with. But my sobriety story is so non-traditional in that I moved to New York and then I got sober. So I got involved in the journalism and literary scene here. And I made new friends by following my passions, by taking classes, studying Spanish, studying improv, going to yoga, meeting people, because like you said, we didn't just meet because of alcohol. Like, whether, we could take a writing class and then you can have a beer, but like that's not why we were friends. And same thing with romantic relationships. And then like with the MLM, it was really tough, because I quit teaching at the, oh God, it's such a convoluted story. I don't even know if I can get into that. I did not consent to being signed up for an MLM. So
that happens a lot. Yeah.
When I was a fitness instructor, the guy who owned the gym signed all the instructors up to sell this stuff. So we had a meeting and I was just given this, box full of product. And I was like, yeah, so that's a whole other story. But it was awkward when I decided I didn't want to sell it anymore, because the other people at the gym were still selling it. And I was still like hanging out with my uplines, and it was weird. It was really, really weird.
Yeah, it creates a lot of awkwardness where there should not be awkwardness. And I think that's a good barometer of a friendship. If I take this one thing out, do we have a relationship? And if not, maybe this is just a proximity, relationship, and not necessarily a friendship. And that's okay. Like, we all have different circles of friendships. We've got our really close friends and family. We've got people who we just see at book club. We've got people, like, we all have that. And I think that is the biggest blessing in recovery for me, is seeing all of that and taking friendships, relationships, connections where they are, and not trying to force them to be something they're not. I think that's one thing that in the MLM for sure that I realized was, gosh, I spend a lot of time with these people, and when I really look at it, they actually aren't my friends. We're just spending a lot of time on Zoom meetings. So it's a good time to reevaluate. So
Definitely. It's always a good time to reevaluate and just get present to who's in your life. And, something I'm learning is something I'm paying attention to is how does my nervous system feel around certain
Oof.
people? Who activates my nervous system and gets my heart rate going and really stressed
Mhm.
out? And who makes me feel calm and seen and heard and respected?
Mhm.
Um, I would not have ever taken note of something like that if I didn't quit drinking.
Right. No, definitely. And if anything, the connection would have been over happy hour. Like that so which automatically makes, you know, alcohol isn't connection because you don't remember things. You don't, when you really get to the heart of it, you're like, gosh, the best connections I have are the people who I take the dog for a walk with. And we have these really deep connections about our families. Or, again, the people like at book club that we have these conversations with, they don't require necessarily a ton of maintenance, but they're deeply connected. Whereas the happy hour friendships I used to have, I wouldn't remember what the hell we said the next day, and, like, what kind of a connection is that? That's
Well, and
really
the connection was texting the next morning, LOL, do you remember this? LOL, do you remember
no.
that?
You have my
No.
credit card? No.
Yeah, looking at the bank statement the next morning, like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I spent $40 on tacos,"
Yeah.
which I still do in sobriety, let's be
Oh, I
real.
know, but see, you can. When you're not buying alcohol, you can spend more on tacos. Your taco budget is
Your
big.
taco budget, if there's ever a reason to get sober, it's to increase your taco budget.
So, it looks like we do have some question and answers coming in or Q&A.
Um, oh, and yes, Jess brought up Amanda Montell. Emily and I are equally obsessed with Amanda Montell's work.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah.
Hi guys, I was actually just messaging you and saying, well, I'm gonna come back at 7:45, but maybe we can buy more tacos now. Is like that's
That was the
the
segue.
note to go out on. Like, get sober, you can buy all the tacos that you want. So we do have a couple of questions, and I want to give you enough time to talk about them. So let's get started on that. We have one from Nick. When you were in an MLM, did you have any loved ones? And I think this can, Tawny, if you want to talk about this as regards sobriety too. Did you have any loved ones that recognized that there was something weird going on? Was there anything they could say or do to help you escape? What eventually got you to stop participating in the MLM?
Yeah, good. That's very good questions. So a lot of people ask this because they have a friend or family member who's in an MLM. Like, is there anything I can say? The best thing I can say is that being a soft place to land for someone who is in any kind of high control group is the best thing you can do because there's probably very little you can say to them in the moment. But it can make them a even stauncher believer if you're like, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that again, because it's going to come off as defensiveness. So I don't know that there's anything people said to me specifically, but I definitely knew the people who loved me and would not purchase anything from me and said it in a loving way, but set that boundary. And those people really were my support system after the fact. There were definitely people who, when I was in, would call me out on like, did you mean to post that? Like, that was really cringy. Or, but again, I saw that as like, well, they're just haters. They just don't understand. So that didn't necessarily come to me until after, when I'm like, oh, wow, they were right. I can see this now. So being kind, giving boundaries, maybe asking questions like, hey, I noticed you're not friends with so and so anymore. Is that because of the MLM, or is that because they don't buy anything from you? Just asking open-ended questions, not judging, not telling them what to do can be helpful. What eventually got me to fully stop was, it was a very long runway of like little things, just like with alcohol, right? It was all the little things. And then just finally saying, I don't want to be associated with this anymore, and I can't profit from this anymore. And that was really COVID, gave me the space to stop, see what was going on. It gave me the space away from that course of control. And just, it was something that I realized it had been a long time coming. And that was finally enough for me. So it was lots of little things. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with everything Emily's saying, and I didn't have anyone tell me that they were concerned about my behavior or about being in an MLM. I remember some people that I was trying to recruit everyone, and I would get a lot of just not for me, but I kind of wish someone maybe approached me with curiosity, kind of like maybe like Emily's saying, being a soft place to land is the most important thing. No one wants to be told you have a drinking problem, you're in a cult. No one wants to be told that. But if you can just, like therapy 101, sticking with I statements, like when you blank, I feel blank, that lets the person know that you love them. You're taking time out of your day to express concern, and you're letting them know that you're there whenever they're ready to talk, when and if they're ready to talk. I wish someone did that for me with alcohol and MLMs, but I was so good at hiding my drinking problem. Of course, no one said that to me. I was a party girl bartender. I looked like I was having the time of my life every night. And on social media, my MLM business looked like it was thriving. So why would anyone check in on me? So yeah, I think if someone is struggling with either, substance abuse, or they're in an MLM or some other cult, I would suggest approaching with curiosity and also educating yourself on whatever it is that they're in, so you can be informed, because they're going to come at you with these canned responses and get super defensive. So if you can have a few things in your back pocket, that could be super helpful.
Yeah.
Great answer. Probably, I think a lot of people will find helpful. Next one that we have from Krista. After quitting drinking and MLMs, have either of you ended up in groups or experiences that you realized weren't the healthiest in the pursuit of belonging? What advice do you have for sober seekers as we look for opportunities to connect in community?
That's a great question. Hi, Krista. So, like I said, like when I quit drinking, I was still in the MLM, and in some ways it took me even more into it for a while, until I could kind of see out of it. I think getting sober made me realize what a seeker I was. And I really have had to enhance just my critical thinking skills for anything. So there've definitely been groups, I wouldn't say that weren't the healthiest, but I recognize when it's time to move on from things, like being in a certain sober community that like is great for now, but then I'm open to changing. I'm open to trying something new. So I think it's advice for sober seekers is try everything, look at everything, and don't expect one thing to be the end all be all. If anything is sold to you as the answer, the one easy fix, run the other way. Nothing should say this is the end all be all. There's lots of opportunities. There's lots of things out there. If something is saying it's everything, it's run. Yeah.
Well, that is why AA is not part of my recovery story, because it felt very, it is culty. AA is super culty, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It has saved many, many lives. I know many people that I care about deeply that are involved in AA and 12-step, and I'm so glad that they have that. But I didn't like when I went to AA meetings and I was told that I couldn't talk about drug use because it's alcohol only, or I shouldn't be on Lexapro because that's a drug. That was not helpful for me. So, and I think even outside of AA, in other recovery spaces, I think we should be a lot more inclusive, inviting more people into the conversation, whether they still use cannabis, whether they use psychedelics, whether they are mindful drinkers. I think, yes, there's a significant difference between being sober curious and being in recovery from substance use disorder. But a lot of what we're dealing with is the same. It's these societal issues that we are relying on, that we're using alcohol to help us cope with. So I think if we can realize that we have more in common than we have not in common, I think that can just help the recovery and sober curious community in general.
100%. And I think when you come at it that way, then you are creating more community with other people, because if you have the belief that this is the end all be all, and AA is part of my story. I got sober in AA. I'm a huge believer in AA. And I also don't attend currently because it's just not part of my process now. It's not something that's part of my process now, but I absolutely think it's wonderful. And the structure is great for a lot of people. But being open to people who are recovering different than you, people who are doing life different than you. So, a good way to connect in community is, do you have an interest? I'm going to join a painting group, and, that's the connection here. And, oh, these people also do all of these other things. You can include people who are very different from you and have this shared connection without making judgment of all of those other things. And I think we need to do a better job of that in recovery, to say, you know what, you recover different than me, cool. But you know what, you're sober, that's awesome. You're sober your own way. Like, that's no reflection on me. It does nothing for me to, say you need to call yourself this, you need to work these steps, you need to do that. It takes nothing away from my process. So I think just being open to other ways of doing things, even things that seem like wild to you, is really important in connecting. Yeah.
I feel like that also maybe helps you resist the idea of there being one single answer.
Mm-hmm.
Next question comes from Brooke. As a qualified healthcare practitioner, I get a lot of inbound requests to join MLMs and sell supplements, shakes, happy juices, etc. That's sobering. And it makes me feel super uncomfortable coming from those without any qualifications. Are there any regulations in MLMs around healthcare practices and making recommendations to people when they're not qualified? And there is a little melty face emoji, which is also how I feel.
That is how I feel. That is absolutely how I feel. And hi, Brooke. No, there are no qualifications, recommendations. Anyone can join who has a social security number and a credit card. And I think it's very scary. Luckily, I think people like you who, have medical training, who have a background in science, are pretty skeptical of things like that. But that's not to say there are doctors, there are dentists, there are, very smart people who join MLMs. And it's not because they're stupid. It's because they think it's a good thing. And sometimes it's because they see another revenue stream. It could be they use the products and like them, which is totally fine. But then to put your qualifications on a product that doesn't require those qualifications, that's a huge, I think that's a big malpractice thing personally, but it's perfectly legal. And no, there are no regulations. There's a few rules, like you can't have it displayed in a window that you can see from outside, and that's it. But I've gone to a pharmacy before and seen the MLM essential oils there, and it makes me automatically skeptical of the pharmacy or the doctor. But I think for a lot of people, it's like, oh, well, these must be good because, Dr. Brooke is selling them, right? And it almost gives approval or endorsement to it, which I think is really scary.
And this one feels like a good one to end on. This is from Marina. What have you learned about yourselves since writing your books?
Hi, Irina.
Girl. I gotta say, I'm really glad my book is not a memoir. And I say that because after, writing it, promoting it, if I was talking about my own shit on all of these press talks, I would be so traumatized, I think. I don't know. But it really taught me, I think I felt more confident as a journalist after writing this book because, my book began as a memoir, and then I wrote a whole bunch I workshopped it for years, and I really tried to tell a sober sex story, the Tawny story then once I pulled myself out of it and wrote and researched and interviewed people, I was able to see that this is more of a systemic cultural conversation as opposed to just my personal stuff. Now that I have this physical thing that I wrote, which Jess was my editor. She, like, editors deserve all, like, you really helped shape this book, Jess. It's seriously so validating for me as a journalist, if that makes sense. I was like, wow, when I was doing the audiobook and I was reading it for the first time in a while, I was like, wow, I really did a lot of research here that you don't really realize when you're in it, if that makes sense. I don't know. That was my experience. What about you, Emily?
Yeah. I have learned that my next book will be fiction. No, I mean, in all seriousness, it is hard in nonfiction and memoir because the pushback feels really personal.
Yeah.
Rather than someone being like, oh, I just don't like your writing style, or I don't like the story you told, it feels very much like, well, I don't like you. And I think that it has made me much better at filtering what criticism I allow in. I don't read my book reviews. Tawny, we've had lots of conversations about this. Once in a while, one will like creep in, and like it's inevitable that you'll, see a bad one or whatever. But just, having that discernment of, okay, this is actually not about me. This is about that person who read it, and that's a them. I think it's helped me establish even better boundaries. But also, I'm writing fiction next, so there you go.
Also, I think a great note to end on. We will await your novel with bated breath, and also, Tawny, whatever it is that you do next. But in the meantime, please seek out Dry Humping. Please seek out Hey Hun. Thank you both for a really, really wonderful and fascinating conversation. I learned a lot, I think. I can tell from the chat that everybody else learned a lot. So yeah, thank you both so much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Jess. And shout out to Jess has a fabulous memoir, Women and Other Monsters.
I don't think of it as a memoir because I don't want people to talk to me about it like it's a memoir. But I did really relate to everything that you guys were saying.
Yeah, that is also, if you're looking for a good book and you're interested in mythology, check out Jess's not memoir.
Very gracious. Thank you. Right. I don't know how to end this, but Christina does.